Hi, I'm Heather, student trainee from Towson University with Maryland Center for Developmental Disabilities at Kennedy Krieger.
Hi, I'm Matt, the Public Policy Specialist for People on the Go of Maryland.
Hi, I'm Ken, the Public Policy Coordinator for People on the Go of Maryland.
And today we're here to discuss fair wages for workers with disabilities. But first, who is People on the Go? People on the Go is a self-advocacy group empowering persons with disabilities who strive for equal rights by eliminating discrimination. Beginning in 1989, POG has established 10 groups in Maryland. They are the largest self-advocacy organization in Maryland with more than 200 members, partnering with Maryland Center for Developmental Disabilities at Kennedy Krieger and the Maryland Developmental Disabilities Council. Moving on, Ken, what are fair wages for workers with disabilities?
Many people with disabilities make sub-minimum wage. Sub-minimum wage means that someone makes less than minimum wage. This is because of the Fair Labor Standards Act, which has been in place since 1938. It is a section called 14C. This allows businesses to pay workers with disabilities less than the federal minimum wage if they get permission from the Department of Labor. New Hampshire is the only state to make this practice illegal. People on the Go want to make Maryland the second state to make this illegal.
So what is People on the Go's position regarding sub-minimum wage?
Our position regarding sub-minimum wage is clear that sub-minimum wage is an antiquated, discriminatory practice which violates the civil rights of people with disabilities.
So what would be an appropriate way to end this practice?
An appropriate way to end the practice of sub-minimum wage is through a careful phase-out which can be measured over a period of years.
So how long will it take?
No one can say for certain how long it will take to phase out 14C or sub-minimum wage, but what is clear is that we need comprehensive legislation to really get the ball rolling, so to speak. There are many groups working on the issue of what post-14C policy would look like, but the fact is we need comprehensive legislation to really reinforce the idea of phase-out. Without comprehensive legislation, we will not be able to phase out 14C.
So what will this change look like in the future?
Well, quite simply, all people will be paid at or above minimum wage for their work.
In a perfect situation, everyone would be working in a job of their choosing and making a livable wage.
So what types of organizations currently hold a 14C certificate?
The types of organizations which currently utilize 14C are nonprofit disability providers of services who employ people with disabilities.
Why are people and organizations opposed to altering sub-minimum wage?
People and organizations are opposed to altering sub-minimum wage or 14C policy because they believe that some people with disabilities are less productive than their non-disabled peers.
Matt, you took the answer right out of my iPad. Seriously, this is a civil rights issue. No other population in the United States gets paid less than minimum wage. No other group within our society is treated this way. These programs keep people from taking advantage of opportunities that new technologies can provide. These programs are not inclusive and do not give individuals the opportunity to work with their non-disabled peers in the community at least at or above minimum wage. Change is hard for some people. We feel people who work in this field want to see the best for people with disabilities but are reluctant to see the end of 14C for fear of failure.
So how does an organization determine how much to pay an individual under the 14C certificate?
An organization determines an individual's rate of pay by conducting a time study which measures the worker's rate of productivity. And based on their productivity rate, that determines how much a worker is paid for his or her work.
So do all people with disabilities undergo study?
No, only organizations that utilize the 14C certificate require people with disabilities to undergo time studies for their work.
Unless they get paid the prevailing wage.
I'm glad you brought up the issue of prevailing wage, Ken, because that makes the issue of 14C quite complicated, unfortunately. There are people who work under 14C but make above the minimum wage. They make what is known as prevailing wage. This is most often done in areas that utilize government contracts. So the disabled worker still undergoes the time study, but most often they're determined to be more productive than somebody making sub-minimum wage, but they still make less than what a non-disabled worker would be paid for doing that particular task.
So what outcomes is POG hoping to achieve?
Well, as I mentioned before, we hope for a comprehensive phase-out which will allow providers of services and individuals and families to really deal with the issue of 14C in a way that makes sense. We recognize the fact that you can't get rid of 14C overnight.
We hope that people with disabilities can obtain work of their choosing that is competitive with their peers.
So Ken, what challenges do you expect to encounter?
We expect some providers will oppose the legislation. Some families will oppose the legislation because they feel their loved ones are safer in a sheltered workshop or just working in general with people with disabilities.
I also understand that you have some experience with sub-minimum wage.
Yes. After I graduated from high school in 1983, I attended Johns Hopkins Computer Training School, completed the coursework, and set my sights on getting a job in the computer field. To my surprise, after Department of Rehabilitation Services nurse couldn't get me a job, they sent me to a sheltered workshop. Do you know how demeaning it was going to a sheltered workshop after completing a difficult programming class? So I went one day and saw what it was all about and never went back. But what if I did go back and work there? I probably would have still been there working for pennies on the dollar, not having the opportunities I have today, not having money to buy a van, not having the money to buy my own house. Now I coordinate the advocacy and public policy initiatives for people on the go of Maryland. I represent people on the go on the Developmental Disabilities Coalition. I have the honor to sit on the United States President's Committee for Individuals with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. I have the honor to sit on the United States President's Committee for Individuals with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. I also sit on the Community Advisory Council for the Maryland Center for Developmental Disabilities. I am the chair of the Developmental Disability Administration Waiver Advisory Council, and I sit on other various state and local committees. I am well versed in community living and the importance of directing your own services. I have also completed the Partners in Policy Making program, served as a legislative intern with the Maryland Senate, and worked as an Ask Me interviewer for the ARC of Maryland and Developmental Disabilities Administration after studying computer programming at Johns Hopkins University.
As you can see, people with disabilities are clearly productive workers if they're matched with the right job.
People on the Go of Maryland is taking the policy position that we will work with any group that is serious about looking at phasing out these practices in a way that makes sense for the state of Maryland as a whole. We consider this to be an imperative for the people that we represent. With this in mind, it is time for all parties concerned to move forward together in a way that is not determined by far-off politicians, but rather those of us who have a direct stake in Maryland and who see the state as home.
In closing, I just want to reiterate the original point that this is an overall civil rights issue. No other group within our country would be treated this way. No other group has their wage determined based on an arbitrary time study, which often incentivizes the provider to pay the worker less.
That concludes People on the Go's position statement regarding subminimum wage. Thanks for listening.